this episode starts that there were some audio issues. Sorry about that. Something went wrong with our recording bot, so I sound a bit deep in places and there might be a few skips on Rob's track, but I think overall the audio is pretty decent despite these issues. So hope that doesn't ruin your enjoyment of this episode. It's on quite an important topic, so hopefully you can bear with us and carry on listening. And on with the show.
So hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a political podcast that has a few suggested amendments of its own. How are you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. We're in the, anyone who's been watching the news today, and hopefully if you're listening to this, will be probably Wednesday morning, so we're going to try and get this out as quickly as possible after today's events. I think we're just going to skip the headlines and go straight into what's happened. Can you bring us up to speed on where we are today with this meaningful vote?
In short, the motion went to the House of Commons today, deciding on Theresa May's version of the Brexit deal. The final result was, let me just get the exact figure here. The noes were 4 and the yeses were 202, meaning that Theresa May has lost by 230 votes, which is the largest defeat for a sitting government in history. Most people predicted it to be defeated 100, which would have been as big as Ramsay MacDonald's minority government back in 1924. She surpassed even those low expectations.
I was looking at it, I think Sky predicted 225 majority against, and that seemed kind of ridiculous this morning, but 230 against.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and it's come from almost every party in the Commons voting against her. Her coalition, partners in the DUP, certainly from her own government with the backbenchers, including Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's been, like I mentioned at the start, it's an unprecedented defeat for this government, and kind of draws a line under what Theresa May has been trying to do for the last 2 years by saying this deal is dead. We need a new deal, or maybe no deal.
Yeah, and I think we all saw this coming. I don't think anyone really thought she was going to win this vote, but it's just, it's the the biggest. Well, the biggest defeat. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, we didn't expect that, did we? Necessarily. And yeah, it's just been a bit of a crazy day and a crazy, half hour for anyone who was following it live.
I don't know if you followed it live. It wasn't as big as the defeat before it. So there were 4 motions. There were amendments that were put onto the Brexit motion. That there was one tabled by Jeremy Corbyn, one tabled by the SNP, and 2 by Conservative MPs. The Labour and SNP withdrew theirs, and one Conservative did. Another guy decided to keep his. That the May vote was delayed by about 10 minutes while they tried to vote on this other amendment that was done to the deal. That lost by 24 votes for and 600 against, which was a real show that everybody thought they were wasting everybody's time by doing that. So, yeah, at least Theresa May isn't the biggest loser in the House of Commons tonight.
Wow, that's an impressive statement. My brain is still kind of reeling from what we watched. So let's try and put this in some kind of order. So it's 5 days they've been chatting about this, right? And I think we all, as I've alluded to, we all kind of saw this was coming. It's been worse than expected. What happened almost immediately after that? So we had Jeremy Corbyn stands up, and what happened?
Well, yeah, he reacted to what Theresa May herself said first. So Theresa May got up and stated that because of the size of the defeat, that she would allow a no confidence motion against her government if the opposition would want to do that. That sort of was a sign for Jeremy Corbyn to stand up and say he was going to do that. It was one of the more sort of visceral speeches from Corbyn. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Like, I saw that, and I consider him quite, like, he's quite measured. The joke on Dead Ringers, right, is always like he's the man who brings you the jam. He's like, oh, would you like some jam with that? Would you like? He's very, very calm and measured in his speech normally, and I don't think I've ever seen him so animated. Like, he looked angry.
Yeah, I thought he was going to lamp someone, to be honest. But he really, he really was quite passionate about it, as you'd expect. And it's a move that people thought should have come for quite some time. I believe the SNP leader stood up after Jeremy Corbyn and said that this whole matter should have been done sooner. Jeremy Corbyn should have forced the issue before Christmas. He was, it's worth pointing out, denied the time by the government to speak on a no confidence issue before Christmas for the government to speak about it. So, it may be a bit harsh, the SNP saying that, but this has been tonight is the culmination of everything that's been building ever since Theresa May put her deal on the table in late November. And now it's finally come to a head, and I think we all know what the definitive answer is now, that deal is dead. The big question now is what comes next.
Yeah, and I managed to watch maybe 20 minutes of the BBC's live kind of summary after the announcement, and they had a whole host of different people on, people from the Telegraph, people who are Brexiteers and Remainers. And it's interesting that even from this, where you feel like you can draw quite a clear impression, people are taking it multiple ways. You had people saying, "Oh, well, this is clearly proof that everyone wants a deal, right? But not that deal." And then you have other people being like, "Oh no, this is clearly proof that we want no deal," which I would imagine a large number of those people voting against this deal don't want no deal, judging by what we've heard in the Commons. So even in this kind of what some people would assume is a very cut and dry vote, there's people out there being still claiming their side's view of it. And I think Brexit has done this with everything. Like, no one agrees on anything at all.
It was the curse of Brexit that although it was presented to us as a binary choice, yes or no, in reality it's never been that way. And there's about 4 or 5 different scenarios, even from tonight, about which Brexit could go. So yeah, there's still a lot to be decided. And my one word of caution for people listening to the news would be to think of the politician who's speaking and think of the agenda that they are trying to push.
Yeah.
For example, Jacob Rees-Mogg will want a no deal, same as Nigel Farage. So he'll say this is a big swing for no deal. Boris Johnson, interestingly, said it was a defeat for May's deal, but actually meant that Parliament wanted another deal that Boris Johnson seemed quite confident he could deliver in the time that's got left. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I saw that interview as well. That was one of the other things I managed to get in before we came over for this recording, and he was just. Firstly, he looks like he needs to have some sleep. I think that's probably true of all MPs, but of anyone I've seen kind of stand up and I was like, oh, Boris Johnson has aged in the last few months. He seemed very confident that we could just swan over to the EU and be like, oh yeah, so no backstop and this and that and whiff-waff and everything will be fine. And I think I don't know where he gets his optimism from, but I think it's been misguided since the run up to the actual referendum that we can achieve these deals. So
yeah, definitely. I did find his speech tonight quite confusing. There's a lot of from Theresa May's government saying that this is a time for the EU to react to this deal, saying that, this is a wake-up call for the EU. They're the ones who should now come to the table with something different, because it's clear the deal that they've provided doesn't cut the mustard. All I would say to that is that quite concerned the deal, and almost immediately after the vote has come out and said that they will not be hosting an emergency summit to do any renegotiations. Their line is that the deal is the deal is the deal, and that Parliament will just have to rethink it again. So we are at the moment at quite a stalemate between the UK and the EU.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw some tweets going out. I can't remember if they were statements or tweets, but there was definitely, I think it was Donald Tusk saying that maybe we could think about a more positive outcome, which I assume is inferring that we should just stay and call off this whole Brexit deal.
Yeah, and the EU has been, I think some members in between Tusk has always been quite keen to tease the option that we would stay within the EU, and that's the easiest option for everyone involved. I agree, very easy for us to do that. Nothing would change, but I don't think that would be politically feasible in the UK at the moment.
Oh, yes. So we've had one of our listeners in the chat saying that the votes registered, people knew about it, only people who were engaged with international politics really paid attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that there's a high level of engagement with this discussion, and there is already in the UK. Like, a lot of people are already bored of talking about Brexit every time. I know we do it on this podcast, so apologies in advance if we're boring you. But it's. I could have told you this sooner, but Brexit's really complicated, guys. There's a real sort of high barrier to discuss it, and I'm starting to suspect that even our own government doesn't really understand what leaving the EU means. The effect that it will have on the international community going forward, I think, in a long-term sense, is that they were expecting this. It's been no secret for weeks that May's deal was doomed to failure. Most people, we said, predicted 100. The fact that it's 200 tonight only doubles down on those suspicions. So I don't expect currency markets will move in a huge way. The biggest thing that we've got to look forward to now is, well, the uncertainty around what deal is next. I think we can only look at each. The way I'd encourage people to look at Brexit at the moment is by looking at by milestone. So I can't say what's going to happen feasibly after the no confidence vote. I can give you a rough estimate, but we won't know until that vote's happened tomorrow which multitude of directions Brexit may split into.
Well, I'll have to decide later whether I leave this in or not. But I was speaking to my man in Whitehall on Monday, and as of now, as of the vote going against May, basically the civil service is on no deal mode. So that's, they have to assume that that's what's going to happen as a worst case now. And I mean, obviously they have had people in the civil service working on the possibility of a no deal, but the general assumption has been that a deal will be reached, whatever it is, and they've been working towards that. And now they have to suddenly start thinking about no deal being a real possibility.
Yeah, they should do. They should have been doing it for the past 2 years, to be honest, in my opinion. Doing it with 40 days to spare seems a little bit like people are just pulling ideas out from the back of the sofa.
Hiring a freight company that don't have any boats yet and haven't even sorted out their marina.
Yes, correct. And I think paying them, what was it, 13.8 million for the privilege of having their no ferries.
Yeah, as mentioned in the chat as well, the fact that their terms and conditions were those of a pizza delivery service.
Yes. I don't think they even had the same. They weren't even registered at House, were they? They were a tiny company, which, was bizarre. The other thing that they did was the traffic jam near the Dover ports. Did you see that?
Yes, I saw this. But for listeners who aren't aware, who aren't based in the UK, we have a lot of traffic that goes through Dover via the tunnel, and as well as on ferries. And basically, it's a thing called Operation Stack that gets put into place in Kent when there's problems on the motorway, and you'll be driving past in your car to see all the lorries lined up all the way up the M20, and people were concerned that that's only going to get worse, and I think it's a reasonable concern. But also, they decided to do this kind of test of what it would be like. I think they got 13 lorries in the end to turn up, and they had trouble getting there and were late. It was the most. I'll have to find a link, but it was utter shambles.
It was the most British traffic jam ever. The traffic jam that turned up late for about, I think they paid them about £250 to £500 per lorry for that fake traffic jam. And I think I mentioned him in the last episode, but I will go on about him. Both of these things are related to the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, who also brought you the drone fiasco before Christmas.
Oh, yeah, the Transport Secretary who, as someone who had to take the train for a fair hello Google, as someone who had to take the train for, the last 15 months or so, his views on all the stuff to do with the trains and how they're going to sort out these disputes have not been helpful at all. So yeah, he's got form. In fact, I think a lot of them have these at the moment. There's nearly everyone who's currently trying to handle Brexit. You can point to something stupid they've done fairly recently. That's not filling me with confidence.
Yeah. I like to treat politicians with a degree of respect and think that they have a very hard job. But Chris Grayling for me really is a grade A numpty who I cannot remember a single positive kind of thing that he's done for the government whilst his time in cabinet, and that's in several different cabinet roles. So that's my small Chris Grayling rant out of the way.
Yeah.
I don't know. The point is we've got a vote of no confidence tomorrow. None of these people may have jobs by the end of the week.
Yeah. Okay. With that in mind, maybe let's not spend too much time on them. Yeah.
Yeah. So their political future is only as long as Theresa May's government. But everybody who's been involved in this, I don't think comes out of it looking good. That's probably why you've seen people like David Davis and Boris Johnson remove themselves to the backbenches. So if there is a call for a new government after this, they can return to the front bench with somebody else in charge.
So moving on to that then, what are your thoughts on tomorrow's vote? Because my impression is that we have the DUP and the RG saying they'll support Theresa May. I can't see any Conservative wanting a Labour government. instead of a Conservative government. So I don't see a logical way that Theresa May will lose tomorrow, but then Brexit has made everything topsy-turvy. So what are your impressions on that?
I think that you are quite right that by all matters, Theresa May should win the vote tomorrow. Like you said, she's got the support of the DUP, who would support the deal, would support Theresa May to come forward with other deal. The ERG, who you mentioned, who are the European Research Group, they're a group of backbenchers headed by Kebog, who are most hard Brexit no dealers out there, the people who were stressing their lack of support for Theresa May's deal the most. They've said they'll support her because they don't want Jeremy Corbyn in. This might lead some people to ask, why did Jeremy Corbyn even call for this vote in the first place? The simple reason behind that is that when the government has just lost by a majority of 230 votes, that's your best opportunity to go ahead and press for that. I hadn't, he'd look stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I was discussing this earlier with some of the people who are in the chat right now, and my impression is very much that he essentially had to. Like, if he hadn't done so, I think it would be very quick fall for him from the leadership of the Labour Party. Enough people were already making noise that he hadn't called it already, because he hadn't called it already. So I mean, yeah, if he didn't do it, then people would have called him weak and so on.
Yeah, he's left in a position, like you said, with no choice, and now
strike while the iron's hot.
Well, yeah, like I'm trying to pick off the top of my head who from because it will need Conservatives to knock the vote in Jeremy Corbyn's favour. But
I think it's only 8, right? He would need, because there's a pseudo majority of 7 with the DUP.
Yes, but politics is so divided, and there's such a big gulf between Labour and the Conservatives ideologically right now. It would be bizarre if Conservatives jumped over to Labour's side for this. Even the most staunch Remainer like Ken Clarke, I don't think would vote for Jeremy. You've also got this bizarre situation in Parliament where Jeremy Corbyn still supports Brexit. He didn't say he was going to remain. He just said that the Labour Party's position on Brexit has been very clear for the last 2 years. I personally think that's very debatable. But the plan that they had set out would be, and they'd go negotiate with the EU with those terms. He's still keen on leaving. Why are Remainers in the Conservative Party would vote for no confidence and change their support to Jeremy Corbyn? That doesn't make sense. So, and the people who really want to leave, along with Jeremy Corbyn, are the hard Brexiteers who are so ideologically away from Corbyn's point of view that they'd equally not want to join him in a vote of no confidence. So, I believe that May will survive tomorrow, but with such a small majority in Parliament, it's very hard for me to say with 100% confidence that she definitely will survive that vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone saying that something with 100% confidence about Brexit at the moment is lying to you. Like, I don't think anyone can be 100% sure about anything, but it seems very likely she'll just get through it. But I mean, as we say, Corbyn had to essentially put that through. So as not to lose face at the very least, and obviously, as you say, best opportunity. Mike from How Many Things, who's in the chat, messaged me just now and was also reminding me that, of course, the SNP could have put one through as well, and probably would have done if he hadn't. So he doesn't want to be shown up by the SNP. Yeah,
I believe that Theresa May mentioned in her speech to the Commons before Corbyn said that she would allow one from Labour, and if Labour didn't put one forward, she'd also allow a vote on the same terms if it came from the SNP or the Lib Dems. So, in short, she was very much going to be the next move by the opposition parties.
I mean, how much can we try and guess about the next few weeks then? So the government is... So we have a vote of no confidence tomorrow, and the government is tied into coming back with something else within 3 days because of the Grieve Amendment. That's 3 working days, so by Monday, right?
Yeah. They will come back with the same thing. I don't know what they can do to change it. And if the same thing, then it will be rejected by a... So in that instance, I believe that Theresa May won't even try and get that second vote through.
Right.
I don't see the point. What's the point of suffering another humiliating defeat by 230 votes? It just makes you look stupid. Yeah. Oh, so they've already announced the amendable Plan B scheduled for Monday. If they have, I think that's suicide. I don't see what people would do. I think that might be pulled before Monday. Particularly if the vote of no confidence goes against it, then it'll definitely be pulled because there won't be a government to vote on it. Which is a nice thought. Also, it's so sobering thought, I must say.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really want to have another general election right now. I know that I don't really want it. I know people have been talking about being registered. I've made sure to get registered, having moved house. I mean, if you're listening to the Brexit vote, now is a very good time just to make sure. But yeah, as I say, we think it will probably carry on. So I suppose we haven't actually said this exactly. We've touched on her speech, but yeah, the summary, and there's a tweet from Norman Smith. It's, I will not resign, I will reach out, I will bring an amendable Plan B motion to Commons by Monday, and I'm prepared to face confidence vote tomorrow, which we have discussed. So that's the summary of Theresa May's response. It's very kind of defiant, and I feel like I think we've had this. We touched on this before. Like, we discussed the deal when she presented it, and my opinion was that, like, well, you know, it is a thing. We didn't think it would go through then, but I still was like, well, you know, it's this or no deal, really, is how it seems. But yeah, she's still very, you know, I'm going to do this, and with this tiny majority, I'm not really sure. Yeah, I mean, someone in the chat saying she wants to present herself as a strong leader, and she's trying her hardest, but it's tricky.
She's trying, but if I was Theresa May, I don't think I would know how my party feels about me right now, to be honest, because she had to pull a vote because they wouldn't support her deal. Her deal, which is definitely hers, but Brexit secretary has resigned because of it. So it's one designed by May. She then had to face a vote of no confidence from her own party. One was certainly not by a huge or resounding margin. Then after that, she has suffered the biggest defeat in the government's history ever since its inception, losing by over 230 votes. So she can be defiant, and she can say I'm a strong leader and say I'm the only one with a plan going forward, but the facts and the votes behind it don't seem to support that whatsoever. So she is going to have to face the numbers at some point. That's what I say, is that the vote of no confidence will be the ultimate test in her leadership. I guess if she loses that really, really will show she's lost faith, and people have lost faith in her as the leader to take them through the times.
I feel somewhat lost in this conversation. I feel we've discussed some various points, and normally we have a bit more of a long view of what's happened. And yeah, I don't. What do we think? What do we think she can bring to present? Like, if she's bringing an amendable Plan B on Monday, what on earth could she offer at this point?
So the big problem is that whatever her Plan B is, so there's two options for her. She presents the same plan again. Okay. The positives of that are that the EU already agrees with Brexit will happen, and it'll be easy. The negatives of that is that we already know Parliament doesn't like this deal, so it's very unlikely to pass. So her next option is to bring a new deal to the table that maybe the best deal ever, will free unicorns for everyone. I don't know. We won't pay that much to the EU. There won't be backstop for Northern Ireland. We'll definitely get free trade. Great. And Parliament goes, yeah, that sounds like the kind of deal I want, and they all vote for it. Then they take it to the EU, and the EU then will have to say, whoa, this isn't what we agreed. So what I'm saying is that if she brings back a plan that's voted on by Parliament but not agreed by the EU, at least then it puts the ball in the EU's court by them forcing it to reject it, and they may be seen as the bad guys of forcing a no deal. However, I think many people would see through that as quite a thin ruse, and one where the EU have already been pretty clear that they don't want to renegotiate. I feel her being that brazen and coming forward with a completely different plan would be unlikely.
And what do you think are the chances that there's been some behind doors finagling at this point, and maybe there is something else that the EU have not outwardly said they could do? Like, in these 3 days, she can have some talks with Donald Tusk and be like, "There's one or two things we'd like to change." And even if that is true, even if that is a thing that is achievable, would it make any difference considering the sheer number of votes she had against her?
I think it's really unlikely that they've got that. The only thing I think the EU and the UK will have been discussing behind everybody's backs at this time is how they go ahead and extend Article 50.
And they did mention there was a news article, which I will make sure ends up in the show notes, from earlier in the week, where they were saying, oh, maybe we can extend it out for a few months. I mean, that's within the EU's power, right? I mean, we know we could overturn it, but that seems unlikely given the current direction of the government. So it's more likely that, the EU could extend it, but it's a question of, I can't remember. Does an extension from the EU require everyone to vote on it, or is that just what Tusk can do?
I believe that all EU nations would have to agree to extend it, but it's pretty much been agreed that everyone is already on that page already. Everybody's like, yeah, sure, you can. Everybody in the EU has already said that they would be happy to extend.
Yeah, okay.
Negotiation. Don't east to get a no deal either, so they're fairly happy to keep the situation rumbling along until a deal can be made. Spain may want to use that as leverage, and we've had that in the chat. I think that's a good point. They've always been, Spain and Ireland have been niggling for little points along these negotiations, but again, I feel that's unlikely. They're the ones most likely to speak out about it, but I think the other 25 countries will probably stare them down in that situation.
I mean, we've already had it's not before because of Gibraltar. And one of their ministers said something along the lines of, oh well, we know we're going to have some concessions about Gibraltar, and then when it came to have to having the deal passed, everything went through. So I think there's enough pressure on them to just be quiet at this for a bit. We'll deal with it later. That is kind of held for now, and probably would hold again. But
so the other reason I bring up the possibility of extending Article 50 is I think it's the one point that would probably if you put a vote to the Commons now and said we will extend Article 50, I would almost say that was guaranteed to be passed by Parliament. I think everyone would agree that they would want more time and that there is no more time left, that we are too late in the day to get a new deal through the process by the time Article 50 sort of like triggers.
I was going to say, I think it's about a year. I can't remember the exact date of when we started the podcast, but we've been doing this for about a year. We had a Brexit discussion on how many things spun out into this. And in all of that time, we have repeatedly said, there's not enough time. And it seems like everyone knew there wasn't enough time, except for the government. And that's why almost in some ways Theresa May's deal was so impressive, because actually there was something, because it had been so hidden away from everyone until that came out. But yeah, we need more time, I think, we've been saying that since we triggered Article 50, before we even had this podcast. So, more time would be nice. I'd like something to happen that isn't just no deal.
Yeah, and no deal is still a very scary prospect for those within the House of Commons, at least. There are very few. It was telling tonight that Boris Johnson, who is seen as one of the arch Brexiteers, was not pushing for a no deal. I think that should tell you something about where the hard Brexiteers are at this stage.
Yeah, sorry. We haven't really got any notes as to where to go with this, because everything is so sudden. Feel free if you've got a suggestion for where to go next in this discussion, please do. But
no, that's okay. But the thing is worth touching on as well. I know that happened earlier this week, but I'll go quickly. So the Grieve Amendment that we've been talking about was one that forced the government to present a new plan within 3 days. That's why the timetable's so short, because it was not a motion put forward by the government. So what happens in Parliament usually is that the government controls timetable for everything, and they decide which amendments make it to be voted on. John Bercow seemed to break with President by picking the Grieve Amendment to have another vote on it to see if that might pass. And this made a lot of people very unhappy, particularly Brexiteers and particularly people who supported Theresa May's deal, by saying that he'd undermined years and years of parliamentary sort of procedure. There's nothing written down saying he can't do it, but it's the done thing that you don't have amendment to mess up the government legislation that much.
And I think this is interesting. So Bercow is Conservative, but he is the Speaker, so he has to be unbiased. And I think it's been interesting. A lot of these things that have been coming out, there's been a lot of challenges to him in the last year or so. And I think it's because, he is a Conservative, but he was quite on the left side of the Conservative Party, and he was chosen by Labour, if I'm correct. So is that true? I can't remember if that's true.
That is true. It was a cross-party support, but sort of proposed by Labour and supported by a group of Conservatives, and I think most of the Labour Party in that instance. Okay,
so he isn't from the far right of the Conservative Party, but one would argue the perfect person to be kind of central and as unbiased possible is someone a bit on the left of the opposing party from who was in power when he was chosen.
Yeah, certainly. And in this matter, I personally think he was right to do what he did, and his defence was that to vote on this, they can vote it down if they want. The reason the Speaker doesn't usually allow things like that is because usually there's no doubt in anybody's mind that they'll just get defeated and it'll waste him. The Grieve Amendment was what had a real chance of having a government defeat. So that's why he put it through, to make sure that in my opinion, that was the most democratic thing to do, because that makes sure that the voice of Parliament is heard.
So these came out on the same day. I'll put them in the chat for everyone to see. These came out on the same day, both from The Guardian, and two different opinion pieces, basically claiming opposite sides of this. So one saying this is the great political struggle of our times. Bercow is brave and correct to allow it, and the other one being his decision endangers the office of a speaker and our very democracy. So to say it's people down the middle. It's The Guardian is quite a left paper, as I'm sure people are aware, and the fact that they on the same day they published two opposing think pieces on that is kind of interesting. So yeah, I think people are concerned. People are kind of expecting maybe his term will be at an end, but he has done a lot in this kind of lead up to Brexit to I mean, at least I think he's mostly been keeping things fair and democratic.
Yes, he's certainly not a shy and retiring speaker. I'd say that you know who he is, so you probably will have an opinion on him. And he's been able to make the front pages quite a few times. So he's certainly one who's made his opinion known. I don't know who else would rise from the Commons to become a great neutral figure of our times. I don't think there's really that neutral figure in politics at the moment. But that remains to be seen.
And so we missed the headlines at the top of the episode because we wanted to focus on the current news. The news is very current right now. One thing we haven't touched on, we went away before Christmas, and I believe the shutdown was already in process when we'd recorded. So the government shutdown is still going on in the US under Trump. And you alluded to it earlier by mentioning McDonald's. There's no catering staff at the White House, and Donald Trump has had to buy in a load of McDonald's to feed people at a formal dinner. So what's going on over in the US?
Yeah, I thought, just first of all, I thought that was a remarkably generous offer from a man who claims to be a millionaire to buy what is literally the cheapest food possible to cater for football players who were unpaid by the state they play for. So it's quite a thing. The other comment I saw, I have to say this, I stole this off Twitter. I can't remember who said this, but it was the picture of Trump with his arms open by the big pile of McDonald's, and the caption said, "Yeah, but what's his third wish?" So
I mean, the memes have been strong with today. I'm uploading one to the chat, which I think is possibly my favorite, which is Principal Skinner doing the steamed hams, but like in place of Trump in that photo, which is very amusing.
Yeah. And did you see the portion? There was a picture that showed the sizes of the portion of chips. That was disgraceful. Too small for my liking. Anyway.
Someone also pointed out in another discussion I had today that the sauce packets were just put into the like silver sauce, like gravy boats and things. They weren't like taken out. They were just packets of sauce in there.
That's amazing. So it's maybe there's one image shutdown that's maybe it's done. In my opinion, it should be pictures of people saying, federal employees saying that they haven't been paid this month.
Oh yeah, because they some of them still have to work. Like the TSA are still working because otherwise the airports would shut down. But they don't get paid. They will just get paid when the government reopens. Which, considering it's over Christmas and the New Year, is I think that would bankrupt me personally. So I can understand that. I mean, I'm impressed that these people are still going in. I know they might lose their jobs if they don't, but it's surprising that at this point they're not, protesting and just not turning up to work.
Yeah, and I think that the public opinion on seems to be focusing blame towards Trump for the shutdown rather than the Democrats, because the reason why they can't reach an agreement on funding for the wall, and the longer that goes on, Trump certainly aren't doing that. We had in the interim a meeting between Trump and the Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who's an important figure within the Democratic Party, that apparently lasted for less than half an hour with Trump storming out.
Oh yeah, storming out, slapped his hands on the table and left. And I think it was described kind of like a toddler's tantrum, really. Which, well, I mean, obviously he didn't describe it that way.
But some people felt that it had been a bit staged, so he could almost walk out and show how serious he was about it. Yeah, important thing is how much public opinion shifts away from Trump. If he starts to see a big dip in his numbers, then he might start to reconsider his position. Currently, you've got 51% of people thinking that the shutdown is Trump's fault, and around about 30 blaming the Democrats. That means 20 left undecided. So things have been slowly ticking in the direction of Trump taking more and more blame, and particularly as it becomes the longest shutdown in history, and particularly because it's just at the moment where the results of the 2018 midterm elections come into effect. This is the first time that they've had a Democrat-controlled House actually be able to do something, and suddenly they can't do it. It's a smack of sort of like a sore loser, not allowing people to come in when it's their turn.
But the thing is, like, Congress is actually funded because it's only it's a partial shutdown, so Congress can come in, but also I've been listening to, I think we've plugged before, Left, Right, and Center, which is a US podcast where they have the host is the center, and then they get someone from the left and the right in each week, from various newspapers and so on, political analysts, to discuss things. And they are famous enough to have had our favorite guy from 538 on. So unlike us. But yeah, that podcast is very good, and they've done some good summaries of this, and it's very much like for Trump, this is a symbolic thing. It's having the wall was one of his big promises, and like this is really his last chance to try and get it through with Democrats coming in and all of that. So he for him, he doesn't want to back down because he's the person who's great at making deals.
I would doubt his deal-making credentials at the moment, considering that this is an impasse that I cannot see ending anytime soon.
Oh yeah. So essentially, I was just saying, it's Trump's deal. It's a big thing. He said it was flagship policy. He's kind of nailed his colours to the mast with that, and he feels like he has to go through with this, and this is probably feels like it's his last opportunity to easily get it through, and it seems to be backfiring for him.
Yeah, totally. And as one of our listeners has mentioned, it's very comparable to the situation in the UK. The fact that you have two immovable objects kind of coming together and nobody's willing to compromise either way, it leads to a deadlock, it leads to a shutdown. Yes, that's obviously very visible with people not being paid in the function of government not being able to work. With us, government is still able to function, but on the one big thing it needs to sort out, we seem completely incapable of coming up with a solution. Like we've mentioned, May's deal is not good enough, but also we don't think that she'll lose the vote of no confidence, and we also don't think anybody, May's not associating the Conservative leadership election twice. So where does that leave us? Nobody's able to come up with a compromise that is enough for a majority. It's almost a crisis of democracy, which is a bit scary. We always like to think that democracy works and that it's the right way forward. But it's really struggling to perform its fun at the moment.
There's a book called someone is now going to correct me in the chat, so that's great. There's this book that's like analysing, what's wrong with democracy, because people know there are problems with it, but also like where can we go from that? Yes, Against Democracy by Brennan. And there's an Amazon link for us, so I'll throw that in the show notes for people. It's a book I've heard a lot about. I haven't read it yet, but it sounds interesting, and I think it's not surprising people are looking around at the moment. I believe the famous quote is that democracy is the worst form of government, except all the others that have been tried. So yeah, that there are definitely some problems at the moment. But I think we have to look maybe at how our democracies are built up. It's not necessarily that democracy itself is a problem, but like there are systems that have come into place, and power. We have, as we said before, we have these problems with the left and the right getting further apart, and there's less middle ground, and especially in America, where it's very polarized with essentially two parties. We have at least had some coalitions in the past, well, one notable one at least, and it's interesting to compare that with politics elsewhere. And I think we did a bit of a discussion about how the German federal government is kind of built up in passing in one of our silly season episodes, but maybe this summer we should do like a comparison of different political systems and see what we think about them.
Yeah, no, I think that would be really, really interesting. It's coming to a point now where we have to come up with a feasible alternative. So who better to solve it but us two?
Yeah, yes, us with our podcast. We will totally fix this for everyone.
Yeah.
I think we've covered the main issue of the day, and we've actually managed to sneak in some of the news there at the end for everyone. I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who's joined us in the chat. I think this is the most listeners we've had in the chat, and apologies, we've had some audio issues. Rob does live in the constituency of the 18th century, so sometimes getting those packets of data into the tubes and over to me is tricky. And apologies that my computer decided to explode. That's a Windows issue, as I'm sure one of our listeners will find hilarious, because he's always telling me off for using Windows. So thank you everyone for joining us.
I would just like to point out that actually all the issues we've had with microphones and computers exploding are one huge metaphor for Brexit. So it really is the most meta podcast you can listen to for the true Brexit effect. So just let you know what we're doing.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us on Unparliamentary Language. As usual, you can find us on Reddit at /r/unparliamentary. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at unparlpodcast. You can find us on Facebook, where we are Unparliamentary Language. And of course, you can go to our website at parliamentary.observer. You can also find us on YouTube under Tinker Tailor Soldier Sponge Productions, which is there'll be a link in the show notes. And of course, if you aren't listening to us now in Discord and you want to come and join us and listen into future episodes, there's a link to the Discord in the show notes. I think that's it. Oh yes, and finally, if you want to throw some money our way to help with hosting and sorting out, I don't know. I don't think we can fix the internet infrastructure for Rob, but we can at least maybe get better microphones and stuff like that. If you go over to patreon.com/TTSS, and there you will find there you'll find all the ways to donate to us if you so choose. And yeah, I think with that, it's goodbye from me,
and it's goodbye from him. Bye.
Typically turning into a robot just as you disappear. Bye.
And goodbye from him. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Oh, it's Tom. You see, he's always complaining about my internet connection. Now I finally get my revenge. Brexit interval music. Please stop me whenever. Please stop me whenever. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. He's back in a second. Please don't make me do the interval music again. It's an impressive microphone. I've been near that mic, and well, as you all know, it's much better than my own mic. So maybe one day I'll have a mic to rival his. But for the moment, I'll just speak to myself. There it is. Look at it in all its glory. It's not like some rubbishy headphone mic that I've got, although that was kindly donated to me, so I shan't complain. Oh, hey! Are we all posting pictures of my mic? I don't have one, and I don't have Discord on my phone. I don't know how I'd do it. Oh gosh. Well, maybe I'll have to find a picture for next time. But it'll just be me looking stupid. Let me take a selfie right now. I realize this is great radio, by the way, listening to me take a selfie. You just keep going, Tom. You cover this.
It's okay. I'm back.
I'm taking a selfie of my mic.